Get ready to embark on an extraordinary journey of self-discovery and empowerment with our incredible guest today. She's not just a happiness hussy, adventure guide, podcast host, and international best-selling author. She's a mentor for whole ass humans, leading them on a transformative journey to conscious living. Allow me to introduce the amazing Christy Holt, the force behind the podcast Create Your Happy and the inspiration for conscious women everywhere. Christy's passion lies in guiding people out of survival mode, empowering them to consciously create the happy life, relationships, and impact they deserve. With her signature Create method, Christy mentors her soul-led clients, helping them connect with their soul-aligned desires and become unstoppable in their pursuit of massive impact. As a happiness hussy, she's dedicated to helping people find truth and love within themselves, paving the way for a life of conscious creation. Today, we're honored to have Christy on the Cosmic Compass Oracle podcast. Get ready for an insightful and empowering conversation as we explore conscious living, unlearning limiting beliefs, and creating space for new awareness and infinite possibilities. Welcome to the cosmic stage, Christy Holt. I am beyond excited to dive into this transformative conversation with you.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to be here. I know we're going to have not only a very fun conversation, but I'm sure one that will be really impactful to your listeners as well. And frankly, I just can't wait to dive in.
Awesome. Okay, so we know a little bit about your history and your focus on helping people with relationships. And your story I find super inspiring of surviving a challenging divorce and co-parenting and now thriving in a healthy, happy relationship. I just find that really inspiring. Can you share the key steps or mindset shifts that led to this transformation for you? What needed to change on the inside in order for this transformation to occur?
Yeah, and I'll try to keep that, in a timely sort of story because obviously, as with every story, there are tons of pieces that play in. But I will share that not that long ago, I was in a very unhappy relationship. I was married to my kid's dad. And what I think now, looking back, is that it really never was an aligned relationship. And it was ultimately born of trying to fulfill my needs in someone else. And what I really discovered throughout that process, which, by the way, at this point, I'm super grateful for, when I was stuck in the muck before, not so grateful for it at that time. But now looking back, I can see how much I was able to learn and grow and gain wisdom from all of those not so pleasant experiences when I was in that relationship. And sort of the pivotal moment for me was coming to the realization that I was the common denominator in every single last one of my problems, and ultimately taking radical responsibility for my role, my contribution, and the way that I'm showing up in a relationship has allowed me to completely transform all of my relationships. And yes, some of them are still challenging because, hey, we're not all at the same place in this journey, but I find that having love and acceptance and compassion for myself allows me to respond to humans in a much softer, gentler way with a loving perspective instead of judgment or conflict creating sort of responses, right? So I was able to, through developing this relationship with myself, figure out a whole lot of things about what makes solid relationships actually work. And I am now celebrating my 6th Christmas with my incredible partner. And I think we're going to get into maybe the details about manifesting love and that kind of stuff as we dive a little further into the conversation. So I might save that. We'll circle back. But basically, he's everything that I imagined would be a healthy, thriving, ideal relationship for me. And I set about finding it, and I did. So in a kind of a full circle moment, I learned to love myself and then found this incredible outcome in all of my relationships as a result.
I love that. Thank you for sharing. And if you're comfortable sharing a little bit more about your story, I'm curious, how are you different on the inside if you took your emotional temperature, if you will, from being in that relationship and looking back and having hindsight versus like how you are now as a person? Like what's the shift there?
Oh, I don't even know if I would be recognizable, to be honest. When I was in that relationship, I was really struggling with a lot of anxiety and overwhelm. And actually, that's really what I wrote my book for, is to help people overcome this anxiety, this overwhelm, this overthinking, all of these sort of internal dialogues that actually keep us stuck and keep us from standing in our true power. And so when I was in this relationship, honestly, I would wake up in the morning and I was overwhelmed and anxious before my feet hit the floor. I was, of course, then doing what moms do, drinking copious amounts of coffee and avoiding everything like hell, right? Trying to do everything in my power to just keep the peace, just try to keep everyone happy. And, this is part of my journey too, and learning about people pleasing and boundary setting and codependent patterns, because this is definitely things that I managed to work through in that process that have led me to where I am today. And so, I was really focused on keeping my family together. If I'm honest, I stayed a really long time under the idea that my kids needed me to protect them and keep them safe, until I realized that my kids didn't actually need me just to like protect them in that way. They needed me to actually do the things that I wanted them to do. I wanted to help them understand that they deserve healthy and happy relationships. And yet there I was, staying in a not so healthy, not very happy relationship as a means of quote unquote protecting them. And I realized, well, that was kind of silly, because that was actually working against the very objectives that I had for my children, for their futures. And so I decided that I was going to go first, and I was going to choose me. I was going to take actions and make decisions that would lead me towards the life that I wanted, rather than staying stuck in the loop of the life that I was currently tolerating at that time.
Right, that makes sense. And as a fellow mother, I can appreciate how we put our children above our own needs and we forget who we are. And it's about coming back home to ourselves in that process. And I love how you talk about radical responsibility. I love that so much. Can you share a little bit about the importance of maintaining self-respect and self-worth in relationships? I'm curious how this looked like in your previous marriage, you in that previous marriage versus now, and like how self-respect and self-worth was kind of the pivotal or the foundational ingredients to shifting that for you in those relationships.
Yeah. So just like you just touched on there, I remember going through this sort of phase of, I call it just a momitis. And you can have this about pretty well anything that you're calling yourself: just a wife, just a stay at home mom, just an employee, whatever that is. When you're minimizing your actual presence, and sinking it down into the size of a tiny label that has nothing to do with who you truly are. And I found myself sort of in this rut of like thinking, I'm just a mom. And, I'm in other parents' phones and their contacts as so and so's mom. Like, I don't even have a name. And so I definitely relate to what you're saying there. Like, it's so easy to get kind of lost and like, who am I? Like, who I was before I had kids is gone. She's gone. She's not coming back. And I don't know, in the mix of it all, where that leaves me. And I think this actually really did play into that, because as a stay-at-home mom, or a work-at-home mom even, it's not the same as when you're out in the world and getting regular feedback. The only feedback is coming from inside your home. And so if your spouse isn't terribly supportive or encouraging or uplifting, especially if they're the opposite of those things, it can be so easy to, and kids aren't really good at this either, right? They're kids. So they're not going to be super uplifting most of the time. You're going to end up having these sort of negative feelings if no one's there to remind you how amazing you are. And if you haven't, figured out a way to encourage your own self. And when you have low self-worth stemming from these things, or, relationships, other people maybe putting you down, past trauma that you're still carrying with you, it's so easy just to stay stuck, because we don't believe that we're worthy of better. And this is, I think, if we were to blanket speak about, people in codependent relationships with, maybe someone's a bit more on the narcissistic tendency side, and then someone else is maybe a little bit more on the avoidant side, then we have this very interesting dynamic that actually continuously plays in and feeds both of those things, right? The narcissistic tendency person is actually a very insecure person. They are really doing everything in their power to get this external validation and acceptance because they don't have it for themselves. And the codependent side, we're not off the hook either, because we're actually playing into the same patterns at the same time. And so when we have these sort of dynamics where maybe it seems like one person is the bully and the other person is the victim, the truth is we're both interacting with each other and pointing fingers and saying they're a narcissist and they're doing terrible things and this and that is actually not very productive. It's great to have an awareness of what's going on. But if we get stuck in the stories, we shall stay stuck in the stories and the relationship and the problems that we're having. And so if we want to shift away from that, start building our self-worth, still, start building confidence, start, setting and keeping healthy boundaries, it starts with ourselves. And this is what radical responsibility is all about. It's not about tolerating less than ideal behavior from anyone. Nobody deserves to be mistreated, no matter what you have been through, no matter what you have done. You don't deserve to be treated poorly. And having radical responsibility, is about you standing in your power to change the things that you can change, which is you. So, by focusing in on the things that you actually can shift yourself and your, the immediate things around you, not other people, we're going to save ourselves a whole lot of time and energy wasted from trying to change things that were never ours to change in the first place. And that's to me what radical responsibility is about.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I appreciate you sharing a little bit about your marriage and what that looked like. And I think a lot of people can resonate with that kind of scenario in their relationships. And from my perspective, both players in that scenario are acting out codependent tendencies, right? And they're also this other pattern of trying to fix things externally, right? And then we're also probably a lot of the time playing out family dynamics of what we saw relationships like, when we were children. And I will also say in past lives, because I do past life healing, I see that sometimes play out. And so, yeah, it's that shift, it seems like, from trying to point the finger at the other person. And then, whoa, there's this wake up call. Wait a second, it's a reflection of something inside of me. And so once I resolve that, then they're no longer a frequency match, if you will. They're no longer aligned, or they're going to go along on their own path and hopefully heal what needs to heal.
Absolutely. And while that realization that maybe it's not going to work out can be very scary. And I know that's one of the reasons that I stayed in my relationship for so long. I was terrified of the uncertainty. And that's just the thing, right? As humans, our brains actually function to keep us quote unquote safe, but it's ultimately about being safe in what's familiar. So ultimately it's about basically creating a Groundhog Day sort of experience, unless you consciously decide, what, that's not really working for me. I want to do something different. And of course, it's never too late to reprogram our brains. We are able to consistently grow and change and evolve our entire life long. Thank you, neuroscience, for showing us the mistakes that we might have believed otherwise before. And so there's always a possibility that we can take an experience. And this is why I don't even believe in failure, because even those experiences that didn't go as expected, didn't go as planned, maybe an outright flop in your, in what you had expected to come out of the situation, they're always an opportunity to learn and grow and evolve and take that information to make the future better. And isn't that what we're all after? We want to, move towards things that really light us up, that really light us on fire and make us happy and, bring out the best sides of us. And yet so much of the time we're operating just on autopilot and not intentionally doing anything to create what we want. And I get it, because that's easier. It's like the efficient system just running without much involvement, but that's not very powerful either, right? So
Yeah.
yeah,
I resonate with this journey. I mean, it is difficult, but worth it, right? Because it's a
yeah,
reclamation of who we are, truly our authentic self, when we reclaim our self-worth and our deservingness and our self-love and self-respect. And then we just don't, those kind of relationships fall away. Like they aren't aligned anymore. Can you share, you've talked a little bit about being nice and setting boundaries. Can you give some examples for our listeners on how to set healthy boundaries in relationships? And maybe now, I mean, you've probably set boundaries now that you didn't before. You probably just let people walk all over you, as a lot of moms do, right? When they've got young kids, they're putting all, they're draining their own cup to be able to fill up their family's cups, right?
Right. And as women, especially, we have been, I'll say, conditioned or programmed, or just the way society operates, the expectations that exist, that women are to be nurturing, that we are to be giving, that we are to be quote unquote good girls. And we're supposed to, fit inside the guidelines of what a good, classy, respectable, professional, whatever box we're supposed to fit in. And when we're not that, there can be like some backlash. And the thing is that we actually, as women, so many of us, because I see this all over the place, we're terrified of that backlash. We don't want at all to risk disappointing someone. And we don't want to risk hurting someone. We want the people around us to be happy, and we want things to go smoothly. Of course, that's human nature, and there's nothing wrong with wanting to be kind to people. The differentiation I like to make is actually nice is more defined as pleasing and agreeable, whereas kindness truly, to me, is coming from a place of love and overflow. And so, like, a small distinction, but actually really important, between being nice, which actually is generally often not very authentic and can come into us saying yes when we mean no, or, doing things that we really don't want to do. And especially in a relationship, it can look like avoiding conflict, avoiding difficult discussions, walking on eggshells, going above and beyond, martyring yourself even to try and make a relationship work. It can show up in so many different ways. And here's the whole thing, is that I know that if you're a people pleaser and you're trying to, get other people to like you and love you and be happy and all of these things, that's good intentions, right? It's not your intentions that are bad or wrong. There's space for you to have and create that without sacrificing yourself, right? It's more a matter of finding the right people to create it with than it is about molding yourself or contorting yourself into someone that someone else likes. And the reason that we do this, to be liked, to be loved, to be accepted, is actually, the funny thing is, ironically, you're blocking yourself from having those very outcomes. Because when you're people pleasing, you're showing up, you're wearing masks, you're saying what you think other people want you to say. This is funny because how do we know what someone else even would want us to say? But we're guessing, we're making assumptions all over the place. We're not being ourselves. We're being who we think others want us to be. And so what happens is, we're seeking love, we're seeking acceptance, we're seeking connection, and we're not finding it because we're blocking that by not being who we really are. And when we're not who we really, truly, authentically are, we're not showing up as our true selves, we're always going to have this question in the back of the mind. Well, if they really knew the real me, they probably wouldn't love me. So we can't even receive the things that we're seeking to the fullest extent because we're hiding part of ourselves. And it's this weird dynamic of like really trying to do everything to get the person to like us, but we're actually putting up a big wall. And I want to now jump into boundaries for a second, because the word wall made me think of boundaries. And I know that a lot of people view boundaries as a wall, as a purely protective measure to keep terrible people out of their lives. And I want to suggest a reframe on boundaries, because that sounds really rigid and actually not very fun. And I think most people feel very hesitant to set down boundaries that are like that are going to result in cutting people off and upsetting people. Like, that's why it's hard to do. But the truth is, boundaries are not necessarily just to keep people out. In fact, they're really an invitation for the right people to come in to a deeper connection with you. And if you do try this on from a different angle, you can share what you need to the people in your life to invite them into a deeper, more meaningful connection. And you can do this in a way that's really loving and kind. So, for example, I think a lot of people will say, like, a boundary would be like, they would express it more as like a preference. Like, I don't like it when you say this. That's not a boundary. That's just your personal preference. A boundary would be, if you use these words to me, I will be exiting the conversation. For example, I'm very sensitive to people swearing at me. Now, I get a foul mouth, and so I swear, but like more for zhuzh and for emphasis, not in like a mean way. Okay. So it's just like if the sentence isn't punchy enough, then I might throw in an expletive. But I tend to not swear at people. And I'm very sensitive if someone is swearing in an angry, aggressive way at me. Right. And so this is one boundary I really set in my current relationship right off the bat. I was like, listen, here's the deal. If I don't care if we're arguing, having the biggest blowout of our lifetime, but like if you start swearing at me, the conversation will be over. And I'm not doing second chances because life is too short for that. So that's a much clearer example of a boundary. And it can be done with love because, hey, someone who loves you wants to know, how can I treat you so that you feel really loved and cherished and cared for and accepted? The people who are meant to be in your life really do want to enter that inner circle. They want to know how they can commune with you on a deeper level. And the people who can't or aren't willing to adhere to your boundaries,
Mhm.
we got to believe those guys too, because they are telling the truth and we can avoid a whole lot of heartache if we listen to what they're saying and doing.
I love that. And you said so much, and I was reflecting on how to, what I wanted to comment on. The difference I feel like between the being nice versus being kind is the self-respect piece. And it really is quite a journey if you've most of your life. And there's also like the girl conditioning, I feel like, that we are trained to be that growing up, right? And even as an online entrepreneur, I have a lot of entrepreneurs coming to me. It's an extension of that. Like they're afraid to be visible, they're afraid to be seen because there's the mean girls, right? That who
Yeah.
are, it's just this big tangled mess. But yeah, it feels like the self-respect piece. And also you talked about like, well, the more you are kind, you're coming from an authentic place and you're coming from a place of self-love. And so you're going to open the doors to more authentic connections, right?
Yeah.
Because you're being authentic, because we've been trained to be nice. So yeah, it's quite the journey. It's not an overnight thing, I feel like, and you can see that reflected in women and the relationships they allow into their life, whether they be friendships or romantic. If they're letting the, romantic partner walk all over them and they have no standards and they're in extended situationships and
Yeah.
they're feeling awful about it. Well, it's like, got to come back to self-respect and self-love. And my next comment was about the self-love, because that's a buzzword that everyone uses, right? But
Yeah.
you seem to have embodied it on your journey. Can you elaborate on how you've cultivated self-love and being your authentic self, and how that serves as a foundation for your well-being, your health, your life, your relationships, how it impacts that, and how people can cultivate self-love and their authentic self?
Ooh, that's a real involved question. Let me see
Yeah.
what I can do with this inside, like, not 2 hours. I think eventually, really, it starts with getting to know yourself. And so, especially if you're starting in this place where you're a bit lost, you've kind of forgotten who you are, you're not sure because circumstances have changed so dramatically that you're not really sure where you're going. The clarity is going to come by going inwards and really discovering. And sometimes this means a little trial and error. It means maybe you have to go try some new things. Maybe you need to go meet some new people, because here's the thing. The love that we have for ourselves, this is the inner love we have for ourselves, is what we see in our external reality. And so we have to find a way to build that self-love within ourselves. And to tie in the self-respect piece, to me, self-respect is part of self-love. It's perhaps the actionable part, like the actual steps that you're taking to love yourself, like the actual things. And we can talk about self-love all day long, and maybe people out there are thinking like, oh, well, I don't have time for bubble baths and pedicures, and like that's just not cutting it. Well, yeah, no, of course that's not cutting it, because that's probably just doing what the world told you you should do, because you're supposed to be pretty and you're supposed to be, nurturing, you're supposed to be giving. And it's just, you're right, it's a tangled mess. But if we start to take some small actions to reprogram our mind, to really sink into that self-love, to really get on board with accepting yourself where you're at. And I know there's so many people be like, oh, I can't accept myself because, I don't know, my arm jiggles here and I don't like that. You don't have to like it and want to stay the same. That's not what acceptance is about, but it's about acknowledging that this is where you are. Because the more you resist and try and hide and avoid things, the more that stuff clings to you like a rogue piece of toilet paper in the, from the bathroom that's clinging to your shoe. And we don't have time for that. We want to live a life that feels amazing. We want relationships that are full of bliss, not blah and fighting and conflict and avoidance. So it all really does come back to starting with yourself. And without going on all day, which I probably could, this is baby steps. It's asking yourself questions. It's remaining open. It's exploring with some curiosity. And this is why I call myself an adventure guide for life. It's really about exploring the depths of you. And this gets uncomfortable, which is why a lot of people don't want to do it. It's uncomfortable to look at those shadow parts, those parts you've been avoiding, resisting, hiding away, trying to make sure nobody ever sees again. That's such an energy drain. And in all of that efforting, you're wasting all this time and energy to cover up what is actually a perfect part of you, because you don't have to go on in that same way, but there's usually some lesson or learning or growth or evolution that can come from it if you're willing to look at it.
Right. So it seems like the self-acceptance piece is a part of the self-love piece. And so in the example of like on the online, women entrepreneurs, that they're afraid of being visible or afraid of being seen and they're getting attacked by women, it's like opening up like to get curious instead of hiding more, it's more to get curious, like, ooh, what part of myself am I not accepting? What part of myself am I rejecting? And I need to explore that shadow a little bit more so I can fully accept myself, so I can step out into the light. This is in terms of like business, but even in relationships.
Yeah,
And you won't it's repaired on the inside so that we
exactly.
don't see it reflect on the external anymore.
Right. And anytime, we have a fear, that's not our true selves, right? That's our ego. And in my book, I call it the asshole mind, but it's like the nattering negative part that comes up with the worst case scenarios. Like, that's not you. Anything that's driven by fear is not coming from your intended state. It's coming from some kind of trauma response or conditioning or programming, or, it's coming potentially from the collective energy, but it's not you. It's not your natural state, because your natural state is one of peace, joy, bliss, happiness, love. And fear has no room in that. That's just extra stuff coming at you. And I don't really believe that it's like a test. And you can look at it that way if you like, but I don't like to look at it that way. I propose kind of looking at it as an opportunity. And so if, to take your example of an entrepreneur who's worried about, maybe mean girls commenting if she's to herself, there is an opportunity to reflect why these other people's opinions matter more than your own, right? And if the other person, the other people, and who even knows, sometimes we're making a lot of this up in our own minds. And I realized, quite a while ago, that a lot of the anxiety and overwhelm that I was dealing with was actually just my own mind going wild and saying all the things, and then me hopping right on board to spin the story into a colossal shit show, really. And we don't have to do that. So, we can take that information, we can observe it. It's actually that whole resistance piece to it that can really shift things for us, because truly, the more we like don't want something, the more we try and avoid the thing, the more we're carrying it with us everywhere. It's on our mind, it's in our thoughts. We're like literally dragging a heavy weight behind us by trying to avoid it. And I'm still working on the positive side of this one, which is the clinging to the things that you do love and want, which we will do that too, right? We'll cling desperately to, like, I really enjoyed this thing. Like, I want more of this thing. And so we'll end up chasing it, right? And trying to experience more of that thing. But again, both of those are putting the things outside of us that are meant to be created from within. And the truth is, if you create the happiness and the joy and the bliss and all these things, which you don't have to do anything to create because they are your natural intended state, it's more of a clearing away all of the other ick and stuff, and not falling prey to those fear-based thoughts and all of those things. Create space for us to live in that intended state of joy and happiness. and ease and flow.
Right. Yeah, and our authentic self. It's quite the journey having gone through it. I can vouch for that. But the question that we're all waiting for you to answer is many people dream of having fulfilling relationships. So, and you've somehow manifested yours and you've
Yes.
gone from this one relationship to another. And I have a lot of women clients, a lot of female listeners who are in these relationships that are not satisfying and they're really frustrated and not having a great experience. What practical tips or advice do you have for individuals looking to magnetize the relationships that they desire? What are some of those steps and any personal experiences or client stories that you want to highlight that, they've tried something and it's worked? Any inspiring tidbits that you have for our audience?
Well, I'm going to share a personal story from my own life to start with, and then we'll see where we end up after that. Basically, the roadmap that I created for myself to create this incredible relationship. And by the way, touching back on something you said earlier, I want to just add that like the best glow up is just you finding and loving yourself. Like that's like the best, I'm going to say revenge, but it's not revenge, but you know what I mean? Like a lot of people are like, oh, how can I show them by being awesome and having an amazing life? That is literally the biggest flex. So here is your pathway. Number one, you need to get clear on what it is that you want. And I know when I was in the muck, it didn't seem like I had a choice. I didn't see a way out. I didn't understand the power that I truly had. And when I was in it, all I could tell you was a list of things that I did not want. I could rattle off like nobody's business. I was like a pro at venting, complaining, blaming, pointing fingers, fault finding. None of this was my fault, you understand. It was all everyone and everything else around me. The problem with that victim mentality, and I want to differentiate the victim mentality from being a victim of something, because again, you don't deserve to be treated poorly. It's not your fault. You're never at fault for being victimized in a situation. So I want to just clarify that up front. But if we continue to carry those painful experiences with us, rehashing them on the regular basis, feeling sorry for ourselves, pointing fingers, blaming, it's just really not productive. And so if we stay in this victim mindset, this victim mentality, we will perpetuate our own suffering. And that's exactly the thing that we actually would like to avoid, right? So let's find a way to do that differently. The key thing is really discovering what you do want. Now, when I was in it and I couldn't figure out what I did want, I knew this list, and I was working with my therapist one day. And she was having me create this list of what an ideal relationship would look like. Rebecca, I'm telling you, I had a hard time because I was like, I don't want this. I don't want that. I will never tolerate this again. I hate this part of this. And I was just having a hard time coming up with like, well, okay, what does it actually look like? And I think this was a pivotal point, because we'll get to what happened at the end of all of this in a minute. She helped me to flip it around. And now this list wasn't that he was 6 feet tall and, dark and handsome or anything like that. It was the qualities that I wanted to experience in a relationship. So on my list, which I still have in my phone, included things like we would laugh all the time. We would have deep, meaningful conversations that allowed us to feel really connected. We would argue in a kind way, right? We would not be able to keep our hands off of each other. We'd just be so on fire. We would go on adventures and explore the world together. Like these are the kinds of things that I put on my list. And so I'm still with my ex at this time. And I think the biggest hangup actually for me in that moment was feeling like if I said I wanted these things, my mind was already like, I don't think he can be these things. And then my mind was connecting that to like, we're over. And that was terrifying. And so I think that's a big piece of why I was struggling to flip it around. Now, happy ending to the story. After I navigated this not very pleasant time of my life going through my divorce, I like literally immediately the moment that I was actually emotionally free from my marriage, and we finally had sold our house and I was moving and he was moving and everything finally felt free, I met my current partner, literally while running a full marathon. And it's just wild because I actually wasn't looking for a relationship. It was so fresh still that I was adamantly not looking for a relationship. I was very intent on just doing me, focusing on me, finding myself to the fullest capacity, which is a journey in itself. And I was, really a couple of years kind of into this journey when we actually parted ways. But I wasn't looking for a relationship. I was very much like, I don't want a commitment. That's why I told him right off the bat. I'm like, I'm not looking for a relationship. I don't want a commitment.
Did
I just got out of this.
You had this conversation as you were running?
No, we didn't have that conversation while I was running, because while we were running, it was literally small talk and I could barely breathe. So I basically asked him sort of long-winded answer questions so that I could ask a short question and he could take up most of the conversation, because he was actually the pace bunny. And anybody who doesn't run, it's just someone who runs at the speed that will accomplish your goal. So they kind of keep you on track for the race. And of course, he was the pace bunny for my goal time of 4 hours and 15 minutes. And it was a slog for me. And I was having a struggle. I was on the struggle bus big time for the last 10 kilometers. And he was just flouncing around like it was no big deal. So I thought, what better way to like get my mind off of the pain that my meat suit is screaming about than just having a conversation. And so we just kind of covered the basics, just a little chit chat. And I kind of got to know, oh, he's like a single dad and, kind of what he does for work. And we just kind of got to know each other just very much on a casual basis like that. I had no expectations going forward. Finished the race, crushed my goal, by the way. And actually, I'm telling this story, or good chunks of that story, in a book that I have coming out next year as well. But there was just something there. There was some kind of connection. We ended up connecting on, a messenger, and ended up chatting, ended up going to meet up for a drink. And there was just something there that was so undeniable. And so we had this very long, slow dating period at the beginning where I essentially was completely whole and confident and accepting of myself. And I was not putting on a single mask. I was too tired for that, to be honest. I was like, I've been there and I've done this, and I'm not interested in, sucking in my gut or being perfect or trying to keep up any kind of illusions. I just like, no, I'm done with that. And so the most amazing thing was that we both accepted ourselves. And as a result of both being able to accept ourselves in our, perfectly imperfect, flawed human meat suits, with every moment that's led to this moment, every single trauma, every single emotion, memory, and everything that made us who we are, with compassion and love, we just were able to come together in a way that we fully unconditionally love and accept each other. And I just really can say, looking back, that that's not possible when you don't love and accept yourself. And that is the foundation to having this amazing relationship, and being willing to get in the trenches and have those difficult conversations. We're like 6 years in, and we actually haven't had a fight, anything I would classify at all as a fight. Like, we don't agree on everything because we're two very different humans, but we've never been disrespectful with one another. And I know that that's possible, because if you set the intention to always be respectful and communicate with kindness, it's possible.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's amazing. So you can meet someone anywhere, not just on Tinder.
Really? Yeah. And you know what? I think so many people are so busy looking for the one. And the truth is, we should be focused on becoming the one. And if we were to focus on becoming the one, what would we be doing? We would be doing the stuff that lights us up. If running a marathon is your jam, maybe you're running a marathon. Maybe it's going skiing. Maybe it's going hiking. Maybe it's meeting up with different groups of people doing different activities. It looks different for everyone. But what you're not doing is sitting at home swiping and hoping for a miracle. You're living life as the one. And then people who mesh with that will show up as if by magic. So it doesn't have to be this, seeking and one day. And I think this actually relates back into the clinging thing, right? We're so desperate for the things that we want. We're so attached to that outcome that anything less is just a massive disappointment. And so what do? We spend our life disappointed that we don't yet have the thing that we want. And we're missing out on all the amazing things that we already have right now. It's kind of a big distraction from the real human experience, which is here in this now moment. It's not next year or in 6 months, or it's not even tomorrow. It's right here, right now. And if we can't find this happiness and pull it out of ourselves now, we're not going to be able to do that no matter what circumstances we believe are going to create that for us.
Right. That's another part of the journey, I feel, is that that's the codependency energy. Again, if you're swiping
Yeah.
and you're not living your life, you're looking for an outside source to bring you the happiness that you could bring yourself. Right.
And
Uh,
I'll tell you what, relationships are so much better when you are authentically you and they are authentically them, and you actually can create a safe space to just be. Like, this is freedom. This is connection. This is love. And we have so many misconceptions. And actually, I'm talking about a bunch of those misconceptions on this season of my podcast because there are so many confusing myths and ideologies about relationship that, the movies and media and our parents and just it's not working. And yet we're often clinging to some of these old outdated ideas. Like, for example, the idea of you complete me. That was the first episode of my podcast this season because I'm like, well, Jerry Maguire, thank you for that complete BS. I mean, it's very romantic and it's a very like ideological thing, like, oh, you're like the
Very
missing part of
Disney.
me.
I mean, a lot of us were raised on Disney, so it's also astrology oriented. It's Pluto and Libra generation too. It's like that codependency theme, and yeah.
And it all is sitting upon the idea that you are not enough as you are, that you need something else, right? It is built upon the idea of separation, which is also not the truth. That is an illusion. We are all connected. And when we act as though we're not, guess what? We experience life as though we are not. We feel like we're missing things. We feel like, we're not connected. We feel alone. And the truth is, you're never alone. I mean, you always have yourself. And I know if someone out there is like, I'm lonely and like, oh, I don't have myself. Well, that's great because I don't really like myself because I've been there. And I remember feeling like, well, that's great and dandy. And I'm feeling really lonely and I don't really like myself. So, like, now what? Well, learn to start liking some part of yourself because you are a freaking miracle. And the fact that you are here waking up today, the sun is rising and you are breathing and your heart is pumping, like, it is a freaking miracle. And so even when there's chaos and crazy circumstances going on around you, you're breathing, you're here living this experience, creating this experience. And all you have to do is really step into your power to create the experience that you really want. If it's not what you want right now, like, the most important thing, stop clinging to it, stop resisting it. Just come to a place of acknowledgement, like, this is where I am. Otherwise, you're arguing with reality. Like, that's not going to help anything. You're not going to change anything. Same thing if you're rehashing the past. You're maybe, retelling those old stories of when you were hurt in the past. And frankly, that's not serving you either. So it's time to rewrite a new ending, but it starts here and now by just accepting this is where I am. This is the circumstance. This is how I got here. Now let's come to an idea, a creative solution to move forward and be the person that you want to be. Then you will find that the world reorganizes itself and brings in those people as if by magic while you're running a freaking marathon. Like, what?
Yeah, and I feel like from my own personal experience, is the universe will sometimes put you in a timeout, and in addition to a divorce, you'll have friends fall away and other things fall away, so that you're in it sometimes in a spiritual awakening in the form of like a dark night of the soul for people, where they are forced to be in a timeout by themselves because they need to come back to self-love and perhaps a higher connection, an
Yeah.
inner connection. And so they're forced to be in that timeout so they can develop that self-love and self-respect and self-worth. And then they've sometimes got to do that on their own. And so all those connections that weren't serving them anymore fall away. And then, like you said, the magically alignment, with all the new connections and opportunities and things that seem to enter their world. So there's this whole journey around this, at least that I've personally experienced, where the universe put me in a timeout. Because and women will do that when will observe that if they're trying to date and no one's coming into their world. I would invite them to get curious about that. Like, maybe it's not the right time for them to date. Maybe it's time for them to date themselves.
Yeah. And that's one way to fall in love with yourself, is to do the things. Like, you don't need to wait for someone else to
Right,
do like literally anything. Like, you
right,
there, you
right,
can even have sex by yourself, right?
right.
We're not needing to
Amazing.
outsource any of these
Right,
things. We're fully sovereign and capable of creating all of the experiences you want. And it's just some kind of nonsense idea that like you would need a man to
right.
do some of those things. Now, again, this can slip over to the other side of the spectrum where people are hyper independent. And that's not really a great place to be either, because what happens there is you've got this energy that says, I don't need nobody or anything. And guess what? That does not attract people
That's a
into a relationship.
wounded perspective. Yeah. But as Christy, I shared with Christy
Yeah.
before we got on the podcast, I was dancing to this amazing song and experienced this full body orgasm just by doing this. Thank you very much. So
Yeah.
it's possible.
There are
Yeah,
many ways and tools and toys and tricks, and your mind is incredibly powerful. So I will leave that right there.
there you go.
Yeah.
So with how you talk about bringing relationships from blah to bliss, that, it's something that everyone craves. They might be in a relationship that was started out as bliss and now it's blah.
Yeah.
It's mundane. So, what are some actionable steps or mindset shifts or tips that you have where people can implement to ditch the disconnect and create the love and connection and bliss and fire that they desire and really deserve?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it does start with doing that inner work. And I know if anybody's listening, they're like, I want practical things that I can do. The practical things are starting to learn to love yourself. I would say, look yourself in the mirror, in deep into your eyes, and tell you that you love you. I tell yourself I love you. And a lot of people will feel awkward about this. It's not something maybe that you've done before, and that's totally okay. I totally understand. You go in the bathroom and nobody sees you, and you do this all on the quiet. No one else needs to know, but try it out. And if there's resistance there, that is giving you some more information too. It doesn't mean you're bad. It doesn't mean you're wrong. It doesn't mean there's something that's, desperately in need of fixing with you. It doesn't mean any of those things. It just means that this is new to you. And that's okay, because all new habits are kind of awkward at first. And the more that you do them, the more normal they feel. And so, a lot of times we see other people doing things and we're like, oh, wow, like that seems weird or whatever, right? Just our judgment of it. It's only because it's unfamiliar. So, for example, I would say something like shaking your body should be so normal, but I think that people would look at you very weirdly if you were doing it in the grocery store. Yet at the dog park, the dogs are like constantly getting all riled up and then giving a good shake. And it's actually very therapeutic. It actually is, scientifically proven to help us move through our survival response. And so we're worried about looking silly instead of taking care of our own internal needs. That has to go, right? We need to step confidently into being the woman that we want to become, or man, I don't know if you have male listeners, but stepping confidently into that version of you and doing whatever it takes, because otherwise we're not, like, the autopilot is going to keep giving you what you've already got. So if you're feeling the call, the nudge to something just a little bit more, it's waiting for you, but you got to answer the call. And so tiny steps, building that loving connection with yourself, asking yourself compassionate questions, trying to discover, what are your values? What are the things that you like to do? What are the key characteristics of a relationship? And if you're looking to find a relationship, get clarity. What is that list? What does that look like for you? What is a daily experience? Can you visualize it or imagine what this daily interaction is going to look and, most importantly, feel like? Because that feeling, if you can get yourself into that feeling, again, that's how we're creating from the inside out. If we can get familiar with that feeling of feeling loved and accepted, guess how we do this? By loving and accepting ourselves first, right? We're giving this to ourselves. We're loving and accepting ourselves. And now we can recognize it when someone else comes into the picture who is offering us unconditional love and acceptance. We're like, it feels like home. It feels like peace. To me, it feels like excitement and peace somehow at the same time. It's like butterflies, like excitement, but also like the peace, like the safety of home. And to me, that's like a clear indicator that there's like a really good match. And there's no doubt, there's no questioning, there's open communication, right? Instead of this game playing that so many people are doing.
Eggshells. Yeah.
And, it takes time. if you are someone who really, really wants a relationship, I would suggest that you do the opposite of your inclination and go as slow as you can when you meet someone, because oftentimes our emotions get in the way and we attach ourselves far more than is helpful.
Our hormones get in the way.
And our hormones and our thirsty bits, call us to do things that maybe aren't actually the best course of action. And so in the interest of breaking any of those patterns and habits that we may have formed, it's really helpful just to go slowly, really truly get to know a person. How do they hold your heart?
Right. That's the important one.
Right? Are they kind at the end of the day? Are they kind? Are they blowing smoke up your ass because they're conditioned to be nice? Right? You can tell the difference in energy. And because if you're nice, then often you're also resentful if it didn't go the way that you wanted, or you're frustrated or you're disappointed. And so if you're having those kinds of emotions pop up, again, it doesn't make you bad or wrong. It's the way that humans work. And it's information so that you can look at, oh, am I actually giving gifts and expecting something? Because that's not really now a gift anymore, is it? When I have heard the example of like someone saying like, I hold the door open for people and they didn't even say thank you. Well, was that thank you the only reason that you held the door open? Because now there's something just for you to get curious about. Again, it's not about judging yourself or shaming or blaming yourself. It's just getting curious of what are the motivations behind your actions and how can you get them a little bit more aligned with your true values?
Right. So to wrap up this podcast episode, with the theme of our podcast being like tuning into one's inner compass, do you have any tips for women, especially on connecting with their own inner authority and following their intuition that you can share with our listeners?
For me personally, the greatest tool that I have implemented that has helped me to really get in touch with myself, because I struggled so much with the anxiety and the overwhelm, and my mind is very busy and very logical and analytical, was a tool that helped me to create just a tiny bit of space, right? So that the mind wasn't fully going all the time. There was just pockets, tiny, minuscule pockets at the start, right? Because my mind was so busy. And those pockets were quickly filled with, you're not doing it right. You're not good enough, right? And all of these sort of things. But persevering through that, my meditation practice completely changed my life. It allowed me to slow it down. Like it's not going away. We're not trying to kill the ego. You're not going to shut your mind off. Like these are unrealistic expectations. And why I think a lot of people think, well, I can't meditate. My mind is too busy. I can't sit still. It's too long. It's too boring. It's too whatever. I'm not good at this. So I think that we're putting a lot of rules into something that doesn't need this many rules. And so I invite you to try meditating from a new lens. There are no time requirements. It does not have to be a half an hour. It can be 1 minute. It could be 5 minutes. And all you're going to do during that 1 or 5 or 10 minutes, whatever you have to set aside for yourself, is just observe. That's it. Watch your mind. Watch what it's saying to you.
Brain. Yeah.
Just observe it from like an independent, like imagine you're watching a movie, okay? You're not in the movie, you're just watching the movie. That's all. So just removing yourself this little bit out. And what happens when you can start doing this is, first of all, you don't identify as quickly with all of those thoughts. So some of those negative things that are telling you you're not good enough and all that, you're just kind of like, well, hold up a minute. Like even that, you're like, I didn't realize my mind said that so many times a day. That is huge. And so don't beat yourself up over not being still or quiet enough to get through meditation. If you observe one thing about yourself in that period, you are armed with a new awareness that has the potential to change everything. And as a sort of a fun thing, I have put together actually some sweary meditations. They're all under 5 minutes. They are designed to help the people who they want to just get their fucking zen on, but they really struggle to do it. You know what I mean? And so it's ultimately about just creating this small space, right? So that you can observe, so that you can not get sucked into the stories, so you can shut down the spiral before it begins and regulate your nervous system. Because most of us, the way life is, we're going through life really dysregulated in survival mode. We're not really most of us in any given moment. And I will say with fair confidence that if you're sitting listening to this podcast conversation, you're not in immediate danger. And if you are, please, my gosh, deal with that. But, most of the time we're in this survival response, but we're actually not really in any danger. Not really. And so if we can bring our nervous system back into a regulated state, well, guess what? We're calmer, we're cooler, we're more able to respond versus react. We're able to just consciously choose, with intention, how we want something to go, right? Because the attitude we go into something with is going to have a huge impact on how that all plays out. Like if you go in looking for and expecting a fight, you putting your hands up and you're already defense, guess what? The other person's be like, oh, well, they're coming in, I guess we're fighting, right? And if you go in with a completely different perspective, you're going to have a completely different outcome. So ultimately, we're standing our power. We do that. We choose. So if anybody is interested in getting these sweary meditations, like I said, they're under 5 minutes. Who doesn't love a quickie? Really get it done. You're going to laugh. You're probably going to cry. It's a very good therapeutic release. And yeah, it's just going to set you up for a little bit more of that space that we were talking about.
I love those swearing meditations. My kids might like to listen to those too, but thank you for sharing that. That's really a transformative shift right there, going from thinking negatively and being able to watch the mind. It's so
Yes.
powerful. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a game changer because before that, you literally are run by your mind,
Mhm.
right? And it feels like you don't have any input. It's like everything's just happening to you without your input, without your agreement, because you're like, this is not my preference. You got
Mhm.
preferences all over the place. This is not it.
Right.
And to find freedom from that is ultimately to find the peace and joy and love that I think most people most of these humans are seeking. So this is your direct path, and it goes from within you.
Yeah, that makes sense. And as we wrap up, where can people find you and learn more about what you do? Do you have any offers that you want to share with
Yeah.
people today?
So everything about me can be found on my website at coachchristyholt.com, and I'm sure you'll have that in the show notes. There's information about my book, my podcast. I have several freebies. I also have a great freebie for people pleasers. There is an ebook available for people pleasers. I have an ebook available, and these are all the freebies. The swearing meditations, the ebook for I call it the relationship cheat codes. It's really your guide to loving yourself into creating better relationships, transforming things from the inside out. And I also have a program for people pleasers and a program called Lover Imagined that is really about building this foundational relationship with self and then growing that. And then the Authenticity Unleashed is sort of like the next level of that. And that's boundary setting, getting rid of the people pleasing tendencies, and really building the vulnerability piece in and the communication piece in, so that you can really create those incredible relationships that you are so worthy of and so deserving of, just as you are right now.
I love that. Thank you, Chrissy, for bringing your wisdom on relationships, helping people attract the relationships of their dreams and be in the relationship of their dreams. I appreciate you being so vulnerable and sharing your own personal experiences so people can learn from that. And I really appreciate you being on the Cosmic Compass Oracle podcast today.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for creating a platform for sharing these kinds of stories, because in my experience, the more we hear stories that resonate with us, the less we feel alone, the less we feel helpless, and the more we feel empowered to go and create the life that we really want, because we deserve that.
Absolutely. And to our listeners, stay tuned for more empowering conversations. If you found resonance in what we talked about today, share your thoughts and experiences. Let's continue the cosmic conversation. Together, we're unlocking the potential of intuition for a more empowered and authentic life. So until next time, take care and trust in the wisdom of your inner compass.